Whoa, things just got real because Brian Friedman, Justin Baldoni's attorney, just accused Blake Lively of witness tampering and trying to destroy evidence by making Taylor Swift delete her text messages. He also claims Blake threatened Taylor.
The file arrived in the inboxes of 24 reporters just after midnight, an encrypted Dropbox link. No body text, just a subject line, discovery unredacted. There was no name attached, no return address, only the faintest digital trace routed through a temporary server in Reykjavik. For those seasoned in the ecosystem of leaks, legal assistants with moral qualms, rival publicists with vendettas, interns in the wrong Slack channel, it had all the hallmarks of intention disguised as accident. Journalists did what they always do when given a key and no map. They clicked. Inside, a folder containing several hundred pages of discovery documents tied to Lively versus Baldoni et al. Most were the usual fare, boilerplate exhibits, deposition schedules, affidavits. But buried in a secondary subfolder was something different. It was a scanned PDF appendix to a withdrawn motion to compel, seemingly forgotten in the procedural shuffle. The pages were dense, stamped confidential.
A crushing defeat for Justin Baldoni. A judge threw out his entire $400 million countersuit against Blake, Ryan Reynolds, and their publicist, and dismissed the separate $250 million defamation suit against the New York Times.
But the redactions were uneven, as if done hastily. One page bore a single, partially obscured subject line from a 2023 email chain. By dawn, that line was being whispered in green rooms at CNN and MSNBC, screen-grabbed by TikTok lawyers, dissected in Reddit threads, and amplified by X accounts with tens of millions of followers. In the satellite trucks idling outside the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California, windows fogged from overnight coffee and condensation, the question wasn't whether it was real. It was, why now? Because while the document wasn't a smoking gun in the traditional legal sense, there were no direct admissions, no dramatic revelations. It was a schematic.
It created headlines when Baldoni's now dismissed lawsuit brought up Blake Lively's friend Taylor Swift. Swift was subpoenaed when text exchanges between Baldoni and Lively were revealed to include the name Taylor. Swift's representative says she was not involved in the movie in any way beyond licensing one song for the film.
A map of the arsenal. It confirmed the existence of a trove of private correspondence between Blake Lively and Taylor Swift. More critically, according to sources familiar with the document's provenance, the appendix was filed and then rapidly withdrawn after defense counsel claimed that materials from Swift had already been received. That exchange, though officially sealed, was now unofficially everywhere. And it contained one phrase that ignited the media cycle like a Molotov cocktail. TS material previously provided to defendants. TS, 2 letters. Enough to unravel a decade of tightly choreographed celebrity sisterhood. In the cold, legalistic language of pretrial discovery, the line implied something monumental, that Taylor Swift, arguably the most media-trained, brand-conscious entertainer on the planet, had handed over documents to Wayfair and Baldoni's attorneys. Not under subpoena, not as a third-party respondent, but preemptively, voluntarily. It wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was, in the court of public perception, a declaration of allegiance. The implications were immediate and devastating.
It's a bad day to be Justin Baldoni. Yes, word just broke that a judge has dismissed his $400 million lawsuit against Blake Lively and his $250 million lawsuit against the New York Times.
If true, Swift had either strategically distanced herself from Lively or quietly undermined her. Within hours, hashtags like #TaylorLeaks, #BlakeGate, and #FriendshipTrial were trending across social media. Fan accounts that once posted birthday tributes and beach selfies were now splicing together timelines of events with the fever of investigative journalists. Swift's lyrics were reanalyzed for clues. Lively's recent silence was reinterpreted as exile. The internet did what it does best. It assumed the worst. But in the courtrooms and legal offices that line Wilshire Boulevard and downtown LA, the tone was less tabloid than tactical. According to a former assistant U.S. attorney who reviewed the leaked document, this wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was a procedural game changer. If Swift's documents were indeed disclosed without duress, it opens a door the plaintiffs absolutely didn't want opened. It reframes the narrative of retaliation into one of damage control. And so, what began as a redacted footnote evolved overnight into a referendum. Not just on whether Blake Lively had a case.
Said if she doesn't release a statement in support of her, then somehow Taylor Swift's private text messages will be leaked. So this goes back to the Taylor Swift subpoena that Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds were trying to quash, right? They're saying, don't subpoena her, she has nothing to do with this, right?
But on how deep the fracture in Hollywood's most curated friendship circle truly ran. What poured out from the leak wasn't just salacious gossip. It was strategy, leverage, and the unspoken rules of the fame economy. This wasn't merely a breach. It was a betrayal, rendered in 12-point Times New Roman and filed, momentarily, into the public record. The courtroom, when the hearing resumed 3 days later, had the atmosphere of a Netflix courtroom drama produced by A24, the kind where tension crackles beneath fluorescent lights and every whisper feels choreographed. Crisp central air hummed overhead, brushing against brushed concrete floors that echoed the click of stilettos and the low thrum of nervous pacing. Paralegals moved like precision clockwork, shuttling boxed evidence down coded corridors and murmuring in litigation shorthand. The 9th floor was locked down, with plainclothes marshals stationed at both ends of the hallway, not for security per se, but to preserve a sense of control in a trial quickly escaping its own frame. At exactly 9:03 a.m., Judge Ricardo Bennett took the bench. A former clerk to Sandra Day O'Connor, Bennett had earned a reputation for clinical rulings and a near-religious aversion to theatrics. His monotone delivery and refusal to entertain press inquiries only heightened the mystique.
This isn't my night.
Blake took to Instagram thanking those who stood by her, adding, quote, while the suit against me was defeated, so many don't have the resources to fight back.
You gotta stop. You have to stop this.
When he tapped the gavel, the gallery hushed not out of respect, but anticipation, because this wasn't just law. It was spectacle wrapped in due process. At counsel's table, Ezra Hudson, a seasoned First Amendment litigator and now lead counsel for Blake Lively, was already on his feet, filing a motion for protective order. His delivery was sharp, rehearsed but raw with subtext. "We are not here," Hudson intoned, "to put Miss Swift's private conversations on trial." Gasps didn't erupt so much as ripple through the rows behind him. The implication hung heavy. Swift wasn't named in the suit, but her shadow loomed larger than some defendants. Marla Friedman, lead defense for the co-defendant studio and no stranger to battlefield theatrics, stood slowly, unfolding herself like a cobra in silk. "They've invoked Miss Swift's name in PR statements," she countered, eyes cutting toward the plaintiff's bench. "They can't now shield her involvement under the guise of irrelevance." The courtroom stilled, the way it does right before someone's life changes. In strictly legal terms, the issue was about discoverability, whether Swift's messages, voice memos, or calendar entries bore relevance to Lively's retaliation claim. But in the court of public opinion, the leak had already contaminated the optics. What had begun as a procedural labor dispute had been recast into a meditation on celebrity loyalty and strategic silence. Outside the courthouse, cable anchors framed it as the cost of curated friendships. Inside, legal commentators scribbled shorthand translations of the arguments. Was Swift's participation legally innocent but morally charged? Did the defense intend to weaponize a friendship that once headlined Vanity Fair spreads and award show selfies?
And at the time, you slammed Baldoni's team for bringing Taylor Swift into this. How did that impact your client?
Yeah, you know, Jake, it's no accident that they brought her into this. The scenario planning document I mentioned from August of 2024.
Behind closed doors, whispers multiplied. Insiders from the Swift camp insisted she had no intention of undermining Blake and that her attorneys at Venable LLP were merely following a routine subpoena, a standard reply, no editorializing. But even the appearance of cooperation was enough to fracture the storybook narrative. One veteran entertainment lawyer, who reviewed the contested materials under privilege, was blunt. "Nothing damaging was shared," he said. But the symbolism was devastating. She became a footnote in someone else's worst chapter, and in this town, that's enough to burn trust down to the foundation. By midday, speculative headlines swirled. Hashtag friendship on trial trended on social media, and a dozen think pieces dissected the fallacy of celebrity sisterhood in an era where brand preservation eclipses private loyalty. More motions were scheduled for the following week, but the real trial, the one in the minds of the audience, was already well underway. Behind the scenes, the case was already buckling beneath the surface gloss. While cable news kept looping footage of marshals confiscating phones and courtroom sketch artists tried to immortalize a saga no camera could capture, a quiet but seismic shift had occurred just days before the witness list leak. Lively's legal team had filed a stipulation of dismissal with prejudice, a tactical retreat that dropped two of the case's most emotionally resonant claims: intentional infliction of emotional distress and negligent infliction of emotional distress.
Blake is calling this an unquestionable, like, vindication, victory. Like, she's just going that route. Fucking bitch. But is this an unquestionable victory for her? Or does Justin still have a shot?
On paper, it was procedural. In practice, it was an amputation. Those claims had been expected to serve as the legal conduit for medical records, expert psychiatric testimony, and perhaps most crucially, a broader emotional narrative, one that might contextualize Lively's public composure against private collapse. Without them, the case collapsed inward. The judge's pretrial ruling allowed only garden-variety emotional distress to remain, a legal term that sounds quaint but is devastating in consequence. No PTSD diagnoses, no therapy intake notes, no DSM-referenced trauma evaluations. The emotional arc now has to be told without props, without witnesses in lab coats, without even a diagnostic code to back it up. Just Lively, just words. And in federal court, words without paperwork carry all the weight of air. Legal analysts immediately flagged the maneuver as a red flare. This wasn't a strategic pivot, said Sabrina Cho, a media attorney who has covered high-profile celebrity litigation for over a decade. It was a concession to reality. They don't have the receipts. No medical documentation, no Title VII compliance. This case is a structurally unsound skyscraper built on a plot they never properly zoned. Indeed, the Title VII claim, originally the cornerstone of Lively's suit and the anchor for public sympathy, was now teetering on the edge of procedural invalidation. Public filings revealed what insiders had whispered for weeks. Lively never filed a formal complaint with the EOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is a non-negotiable prerequisite for bringing any federal anti-discrimination claim. One former EEOC investigator put it bluntly: "That's not just a misstep, it's a fatal flaw." It's like suing for malpractice without ever visiting a doctor. The moment that fact lands on the judge's docket, the Title VII claim is legally dead. Everything else becomes damage control.
And Taylor Swift was like, "What? I didn't even see It Ends With Us until like weeks after it came out." And they wrote letters to the judge basically asking him to kill the subpoena, right? And now Baldoni's team is saying, not so fast. We have a source, a very reliable source, and this source is telling us that Blake Lively is trying to do some shady-ish behind the scenes.
Behind the conference room doors of her legal team's downtown office, discussions reportedly turned from strategy to containment. Should they double down and risk sanctions for frivolous filings? Or pivot the narrative entirely, shifting from federal grievance to a public story about reputation, betrayal, and lost trust? Sources close to Lively suggest she had been unaware of the procedural lapse, trusting that her former legal advisors had covered the necessary ground. Now, that oversight was about to become Exhibit A in a motion to dismiss, a mistake so elementary that even casual court watchers on Reddit had begun spotting it in docket PDFs. The impact went beyond just paperwork. It undermined the credibility of the entire complaint, calling into question how carefully the suit had been constructed and whether it was built for justice, optics, or leverage. What had started as a principled stand against industry retaliation now risked looking like a high-risk bluff without a hand to show. With the two emotional distress claims off the table and the Title VII pillar crumbling under its own weight, Lively's case was fast becoming a house of mirrors, reflective, dramatic, but increasingly empty at its core. In the cultural war zone of 2025, a celebrity lawsuit is never just about statutes and courtrooms. It's about narrative real estate, perception warfare, and the choreography of influence management. What unfolds inside the courtroom is often secondary to what unfolds across headlines, algorithms, and side-channel statements. And in that volatile ecosystem, Blake Lively's once impeccable image, equal parts Upper East Side glamour, eco-conscious motherhood, and curated relatability, has begun to fracture under forensic scrutiny. The shift wasn't abrupt. It came in whispers, a pulled invite here, a postponed campaign there, the slow withdrawal of institutional confidence masked as scheduling conflicts. But by the time Vanity Fair updated her press designation from confirmed to tentative on its annual powerless cocktail invite, the writing was on the wall.
Anytime you write something in a lawsuit, you can never get sued for defamation. And what the court is saying here is that all of the alleged defamatory statements that Lively made came from that filing. There were no other statements outside of that document.
Inside the entertainment industrial complex, the mood is anxious. Brand partners have taken to code red crisis protocols. An executive at a major advertising agency, speaking on condition of anonymity, confirmed that L'Oreal and Preserve Living, two of Lively's longest-standing partnerships, have paused all activations pending further legal clarity. Scheduled product rollouts for Preserve's spring collection were pulled from production lines. "We don't do soft launches when there's hard headlines," the executive said flatly. A planned keynote at Cannes Lions, where Lively was set to speak on sustainable commerce and female-forward storytelling, was abruptly scrubbed from the program, replaced with a terse scheduling conflict posted just 12 hours before press preview kits were due. Sources close to the event confirmed the cancellation wasn't about timing, it was about optics. "You can't position someone as a storytelling visionary when the story is spiraling," one attendee said. And then there's Taylor Swift, the gravitational center of an entire pop cultural solar system, her silence both deafening and strategic. While she's issued no direct comment, a cryptic Instagram story posted by her PR manager, Tree Payne, stirred a frenzy among fans. Not everything deserves a reaction. 3 days. That's how long it trended. In fan forums and group chats, theories proliferated like spores. Was it about Blake? About the courtroom leak? About the emotional minefield of friendship entangled with litigation? Analysts parsed font choice, timing, and story sequencing. "It's a soft unfollow," one crisis comms consultant said. "No words. Just distance wrapped in plausible deniability." Meanwhile, Wayfair, the e-commerce giant at the edge of the initial allegations, has abandoned the playbook of corporate silence in favor of full-contact narrative control. Their response has been swift, structured, and surprisingly public. Legal filings were immediately followed by strategic op-eds, social media statements, and unusually a rare on-the-record quote from their in-house counsel.
To talk about the larger issue, which is when a bully wins. When you stand up for yourself and you get fired, you get cheated on, you get betrayed, you get gaslit, you get accused. When you fight and you lose.
"We will not allow our reputation to be sacrificed at the altar of influence," the statement read, pulsing with not-so-subtle disdain for celebrity leverage dressed as victimhood. But such boldness comes with risk. In the post-#MeToo landscape, corporate pushback against harassment claims, no matter how procedurally compromised, can backfire dramatically. One errant quote, one aggressive cross-examination captured out of context, and the perception machine can pivot overnight. What began as a legal rebuttal can mutate into a PR death spiral. In 2025, noted legal strategist Camille Torres, the courtroom is just one venue. The others are Instagram, Substack, X, and TikTok. And your audience doesn't read transcripts, they read tone. A smirk in cross-exam can cost you more than emotion in limine. Already, advocacy groups have begun circling. #BelieveVictims resurfaced on social media, bolstered by public figures reminding followers that a flawed legal filing doesn't invalidate lived experience. Meanwhile, opposing voices cite due process and reputational sabotage, pointing to the lack of documentation and procedural gaps as evidence of weaponized fame. This isn't just litigation, it's reputational brinkmanship in real time. Lively risks becoming a symbol for the gray zone between truth and traction, between influence and evidence. For Swift, the gamble is more subtle. How close can she remain to the flames without catching heat herself? For Wayfair, the stakes are existential. In an era where public perception moves faster than court decisions, one viral clip, one poorly worded email leaked to a journalist, could cost them everything. The risk isn't just financial. It's cultural survival in an ecosystem where being right matters less than looking right. And with each passing day, the story becomes less about who did what and more about who controls what people believe happened.